All right. We have another 3 papers to go this afternoon, and to start things off, we have Scott Farr. He's a broadcast technology professional with over 30 years of experience developing and delivering innovative models, technology solutions for radio and music services, including Music Choice, DMX, and CBC Galaxy. He's currently the Canadian sales manager for RCS, and Scott is going to teach us a lot of things about the marketing portion of it as well. All right, thanks.
And I will need an AV lesson to make sure that I can get my presentation up on the screen. It's there now. Cool. Excellent. All right, today I'm going to try and dabble into a little bit on the financial and the operational side of the cloud versus premise for technical managers. And the way I say that is that, we might be speaking a slightly different language when we start talking about the cloud versus on-premise, and we start to compare the two. We're going to have to start comparing the two to people that may not have necessarily been in the bigger decision. They may have approved or disapproved your budgets, but now we're going to be looking at a completely strategic change to your operations and how your operational costs. So why now? Well, software solutions are increasingly being delivered by cloud services, SaaS. I mean, we live with it every day. We do our banking in the cloud. We do so many things in the cloud, and we just take it for granted. And all of those things, 20 years ago, simply were either done on your desktop or done by hand. So the world has been changing. The radio industry has been fairly slow to adopt to the cloud-based technology. And I guess, for some really good reasons. The barriers to entry were quite large, and the confidence level was quite low. But today, I think a lot of these barriers have been overcome for the radio broadcasters. Things are now in the cloud are technically viable, they're affordable, and they're highly available. So today there is models from which you can actually broadcast using a cloud-based delivery platform. So the discussion today is really about navigating the financial and the operational differences between looking at the cloud and comparing that to an on-premise system. So I'm going to be speaking a bunch of different languages here, mostly in English, but, I'm going to be speaking a little bit of tech and a little bit of financial. And, please, if there's anything that's not clear, just please ask. I'd like this to be a discussion as opposed to me giving a paper. And I learned a few things because I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So I'm a little smarter than I was. Some of the terms we're going to use in this presentation, it's CapEx, which is capital expenditures. This is the upfront cost. This is stuff you guys are used to every day, spending your money to buy your capital equipment to get the job done. Operating expenses, we're going to be looking at those. I just want to talk, one more point about the CapEx. The CapEx typically goes on your balance sheet as opposed to your profit and loss statement, which is where your OpEx expenses go. The CapEx will hit your P&L statement, but only from an expense perspective, a CCA or a depreciation. So it will hit both sides of the sheet. And of course, when you're talking to your CFO, when you're talking to your financial manager, he'll be speaking both of these languages for you. It'd be nice for you to be able to present to him in a way that would make him more easily convinced of the value of what it is you're proposing if it happens to be in the cloud. The other side is total cost of ownership, and this basically is your whole infrastructure cost over time. So my total cost of ownership, I typically will be looking at it over a 5-year basis. That tends to be the kind of life that we tend to face in the broadcast industry for our equipment and our technology. That's changing as people are looking and saying, well, maybe I can get a couple more years out of this thing. And, so now that cycle used to be strictly 5 years. Now it's between 5, 7, 5, 8 years. It depends on how much money the CFO is willing to release. And then we're also talking about ROI. And ROI measures the financial benefit any investment that you might make. So how do we look at that? And typically we'll be expressing that as a percentage. So what kind of ROI are we going to get out of this? And I had a couple of conversations during the exhibits side of things. And yeah, we were just talking about ROI as an interesting conversation point, because typically you would, as an engineer, you would go talk to your CFO and I need to spend $30,000 to solve this problem, to do this. But there's no conversation around, but here's our return on that. Here's the additional benefits we're going to see in a financial terminology. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that from a cloud perspective. Costs. Costs basically are, and when we compare the two, is we have upfront costs. With the premise-based systems, it's high upfront costs because we've got to buy the hardware, we've got to buy the networking equipment, we've got to do the training, we've got to buy the software, we've got to do all of these things, and then we've got to commission it. In the cloud, it's a much lower upfront cost because we're looking at a subscription. We are going to need some equipment, don't get me wrong. We're going to need a workstation that's going to be has to talk to the cloud. So we're going to need some equipment, but not nearly as much. We're not going to have file servers and all of those things as part of that. We're definitely going to need some computer systems. And certainly not the level of the IT, internal IT requirements that you would need on on-prem system. Operating costs, yeah, both have operating costs. And I had a little trouble with this one because there are operating costs with both the cloud and on-premise. And some of the things we overlook as an OpEx on-premise systems, is that there is computer maintenance, there's power, there's cooling, there's technical space, higher IT overheads. We need more people to be able to support more equipment. We got, of course, recurring software maintenance, support, equipment maintenance. I mean, there's a lot of operating costs involved. And that's why I said, this is not necessarily low from an operating cost perspective for on-premise systems. It is in that medium range because I'm going to use a technical term here, shit happens. And when you have a technical problem, you're going to have to solve it. You're going to have to buy more capital equipment. You're going to have people come in and solve the problem.
Yeah, but if it's capital equipment, it goes in somebody else's budget.
I'm sorry?
If it's capital equipment, it goes in someone else's budget.
Exactly. I mean, there's the challenges too. I mean, you'll have to navigate that on your own in terms of who is going to be responsible for this conversation that I need to have about spending money and changing the way I do things. And I think just the more you're prepared, and this is really where I'm coming from with these presentations, to say that the more you're armed with some of the tech speak in the financial world, I think the better armed you are to actually make your case and get your point across. So when we talk about the cloud for OpEx, I mean, typically you would say, well, it's all subscription fees. And so that's why I'm saying, the typical model when people look at the difference between on-premise and cloud is to say, well, my operating costs are high because I have a subscription fee that I don't have when I'm talking about on-premise. But I'm saying if we actually balance that in a logical way, there's operating expenses on both sides of the equation. And yes, the typical model for the cloud is a higher operating expense because it's subscription fees. But the difference between the two is one is what I call the operating expenses. They're both predictable to some degree, but the maintenance issues that come up under a on-premise system, that's on the unpredictable side of it. On the cloud, it's predictable. You pay your subscription fees. You don't have to have more. You just need to make sure subscription fees are paid and you have your software. Scalability and flexibility. Again, on-premise, I consider it to be low scalability. And when I mean that is that we're buying based on what it is we need. So the amount of storage they need, the amount of workstations we need, and those amount of things. So when it comes to the scalability, if I have 12 workstations in my initial design criterion and I need 38 somewhere along in the cycle, I have to buy that. So it's not really particularly scalable. You have to buy more. The cloud, on the other hand, I don't have to buy more software or more licenses. I mean, I just have to buy more seats. As I talk about the cloud and its scalability. It's very elastic. You pay for what you use primarily. If you're not using it, you don't pay for it. Flexibility in terms of the on-prem, they always have the risk of buying more or less than what you actually need. And of course, what you actually need is based on your usage requirements. And sometimes we don't discover all of our usage requirements until we actually deploy it and go, oh, dog, I bought 38 seats that I don't need, or I bought 16 less. But I think in the cloud, that becomes a higher flexibility because we can say, oh, great, we'll just light up another seat or two, 12, whatever you need. So the cloud has a high scalability and flexibility for variable workloads. And I guess today we're really in the world of variable workloads. This station is on, this station is off. This station needs to operate with one person as opposed to 12. I mean, there's so many different requirements that we're facing today, and the dynamics are really a different place than it used to be 10 years ago. Time to value, and I think this is an important consideration as well. When we talk about an on-premise system, our time to value is long, which means before we can actually derive any value from our investment, it's going to take weeks to months to deploy and configure. I mean, whether, however this is done, I mean, you have to have people on site to configure the software, you have to have people trained, so your time to value is much longer on-premise. In the cloud, it's fairly short. I mean, typically we can deploy your solution in hours or days, which means that, it's lit up. I mean, but we still have a deployment model that says that, we have to train people still, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But again, the adoption model is longer in on-premise because, again, we have localized training, localized commissions and configurations and everything else. So adoption takes a little bit longer. And again, once in the cloud, that centralized training and commissioning is all done up there, and we can save a little bit of money on our costs of training. Our costs of commissioning are much, much lower. And so basically the cloud will give us what we call an ROI impact of, it's an accelerated time to value. So the minute I can actually start deriving benefit from my investment is a much shorter path than it is with on-premise. Risk and resilience, I think, is another major consideration, is that security. I mean, this has all become a reality for us all in good ways and bad ways. We're being attacked for no good reason from people that really don't have any particularly benefit from attacking us, although some people would love to charge you money to give your assets back. But nonetheless, they're coming at all of us. And I think you need to look at that on your on-premise system, but it's an additional cost. You're responsible for the cost, the management, commissioning, and how this thing is all deployed at the end of the day. It becomes your responsibility as an operating engineer, as an operating IT. You have to look after that. With the cloud, really, it's inherently protected from those kinds of things. That becomes our problem, or the cloud provider's problem. We look after all of those threat protections and those kinds of things. But again, that's our issue. And part of our SLA, if we're a cloud provider, is to provide that level of protection, that level of confidence to you in the form of contractual SLA. That's a service level agreement. Disaster recovery, again, is another important aspect that we need. I've had more and more conversations regarding disaster recovery, is that, well, what happens when the worst case happens, whether, it's an IT thing or it's a flooding thing or a fire thing. These are all disasters that need to be, what is your plan? What is the color of your parachute in terms of those kinds of problems? So you can do them both on-prem and in cloud. On the on-premise, it's going to be additional costs, and the operator is responsible for those costs, the management, and of course your commissioning of that kind of disaster recovery. Whether it's a NAS system in somebody's house, whatever it might be, it is a process that you have to initiate and manage. Traditionally, on the cloud side of things, it's a minor additional cost. When I say minor additional costs, and with the solutions that I'm involved with, we put a service on what we call an availability zone. An availability zone is really just a data center, if you will, in the cloud. And if we put it in multiple data centers, if any one of those data centers become, denial of service attacks or any other kind of cloud strike kind of issues, that take out the availability zone, you can also fail over to an additional availability zone, which is somewhere else away from that attacked zone. And again, we also have other levels of disaster recovery as well, what we call our edge player in the case of our product at ZettaCloud. Upgrades. And this brings up some interesting questions. Of course, on-premise, it's additional cost. You have to have an ongoing service level agreement with somebody, an organization that provides you updates and modifications to your software. It involves, obviously additional effort, cost, downtime, and IT support to do those things. With the cloud, basically, it's all continuous upgrades, and basically any new features that would be applied to a cloud-based software or a SaaS-based software, it's invisible to you. It gets applied to the actual core code base. But one of the things I come across every day is what I call the technical debt. of a premise-based system. The technical debt is all the times that we have deferred doing what we know we should be doing by doing patches and upgrades, whether these your operating system, your software system, and if you're not doing them when you're supposed to be doing, when Microsoft tells you should be doing them, when your vendor says you should be applying these patches and upgrades to get these benefits or to make this problem go away, the minute you don't do those things, they accumulate. And I call that technical debt. And so the technical debt continues to accumulate until you do something about it, till someday it comes up to a situation where technical debt is now a huge problem, because not only have I got to apply all of those Windows patches, I've actually got to update all of my software. And you know what? That short amount of downtime that would normally take, if I were doing this on a regular basis and diligently, that would be a fairly short amount of downtime or a fairly small amount of IT support that we have to be involved. But now we look at when we haven't been doing those things, that's a massive technical debt, and it's real. And it's something we don't talk about a lot on the engineering side of things, but it's huge and it's real. And you have to pay attention to it, because someday it always creeps up and haunts you and pokes you in the eye, kicks you in the butt, whatever term you might want to use. But if we're not respecting our technical debt and dealing with it, it will become a problem. Okay, now we get into the controversial section here, where we're actually going to do some math. Now, trust me, I did this all in a spreadsheet, so all my numbers are accurate. You just have to assume that. But so what I did is I took, from an on-premise perspective, I just took a fairly, out of my history, I looked at a 3-station cluster that I did in Eastern Canada. And I said, okay, so here's my costs. And again, whether these are costs that you may have, or costs that I have, or these costs change, these are assumed costs. So again, every situation is unique and will vary, but I wanted to work from a number base so we can actually talk about TCO, total cost of ownership, and we can talk about ROI. I need a TCO value, total cost of ownership, to determine a return on investment ROI. So let's work with these numbers, and just, if you have any questions and question them, let me know. But so I'm just looking at computer softwares that I have basically priced this out on a per station basis. I got computer hardware and software. I assume to be around $38.5 per station. I've got training and commissioning per station. And again, training and commissioning per station typically involves, the actual labor time, the travel and lodging costs that we need to bring people on site and those kinds of things. So I put that at about $7,500 per station. And then software support. No matter who you're using, no matter what software you're using in the broadcast side, automation or whatever it might be, you're going to be paying an annual fee to make sure that you're getting your upgrades and you're getting access support and all those key elements. So that's a cost per station. And again, I'm using an annualized number here. And again, operational costs. And this is where I think we're going to have a much more complicated conversation. So what is an operational cost? Well, it's maintenance, it's facilities, it's security, it's disaster recovery, it's lease value, it's HR, all of those things. And so what kind of number can I put on that? And I chose an arbitrary number, about $100,000 annually per station, which, some people will say that's ridiculously cheap, and other people will say, oh God, that's one quarter of what I actually pay. So let's just use that number as an arbitrary number. So that means with 3 stations, we're looking at about $300,000 a year, and then of course we're tripling all those numbers, which means all stations, our first year costs, including CapEx, is going to be about $443,000. Now the cost over 2 years, these are now, once I have my costs fixed, right? So when I take my first year cost in the second, third, and fourth, and fifth year, I only paid $115,500. That's fixed. So every year after the first year, that's my fixed cost. That's what it cost me to get there. And the same thing with our training and commissioning. It's done already. It's a sunk cost, and it's just the same cost over the 5 years. Cumulative costs, well, I have to pay software support annually. So that becomes cumulative. So my overall total cost of ownership when it comes to software support at the end of 5 years, that's $27,000, because it's $1,800 a year per station times, and over the 5-year term. And then the operations cost, if it's saying it's costing me $100,000 annually, $300,000 for 3 stations, that works out to about $1.5 million at the end of 5 years in terms of your TCO, total cost of operation for your operational costs. So that's your cumulative cost. So we look at the cloud, and I've taken a typical example of the cloud, and again, I try to avoid the commercials here, but our ZettaCloud uses the pricing model. So for a single station, the actual model is going to run you about $18,792, about. Computer hardware, you know what, you're still going to need some computer hardware, but you're not going to need big server infrastructure, you're not going to need but you are going to need some workstations, and you are going to need some local area network stuff so that you can actually talk to the cloud. So we need to go through, some kind of infrastructure, and we're going to have to buy, from Rogers, from Bill, from somebody, we're going to have to buy our broadband costs. We have a thing called an edge player now. So I put that in here because I think from a disaster recovery perspective, I think that's critical. So if you have, when you talk about the cloud, you're going to be delivering a streamed output from the cloud to a physical receiver. And that receiver then basically will receive that signal and then transport that out to your transmitter, to your air chain. We have a device called the edge player, which basically is both a streaming receiver and an actual computer, which has storage capabilities on it. So I recommend 2 of these because they're smart. They talk to each other and say, one edge player is broken, go to player 2. And then when you return it, come back to, and you got now 2. It recognizes and interacts with each other. So from a full SLA, and I want to be able to offer a full SLA from the cloud, which is to say, we've got an edge player which will protect you at that point. And we also have multiple zoning or where we can actually put your cloud in different availability zones in the cloud. So that way we have protection at the top, we have protection at the bottom. So that's the edge player. And then training and commissioning. Fundamentally, it still remains the same thing from a training perspective. We've got to teach your people how to use the stuff. And the commissioning side of things is pretty small. And we don't need to come to site to actually do your commissioning and your training. We just do that all centrally. So there's going to be a significant amount of savings from that regard. We're not going to have a lot of lodging and travel costs, right? We don't have to send people to your site. So that's going to be a savings factor that we need to respect in there. And also I look at an operational cost too. So I have to say that, the mothership for our organization, looked at this and say, we need to undertake substantial operating cost reductions. And how do we do that? And for them, real estate was one of the big ones. If they could take out multiple facilities in smaller markets, take out the whole facility other than the transmitter, and maybe somebody's operating from home in terms of their, the sales model and any other presence they might have to have in that marketplace, that would be getting rid of a lot of money. And if you think about that, I'm saving lease costs in 10 cities. I don't know what that's worth. Depends on the city. Depends on the nature of the leasehold that you have. What does that mean? So in my model, just with an assumption here, is to say on a smaller scale, it may not be a 50% reduction like I'm showing here, but on a larger scale, it would be 50% or possibly more. And I've worked with some organizations who simply, been saving in the range of 70 to 80%. And it depends, again, where you are, what you're paying, what kind of space you need, how much you need. So the amount of operational cost reductions saving you will get, this is going to change from situation to situation. So I just assumed a value of 50%. So at the end of the day, my total operating costs, total cost of ownership for on-prem would be about $1.6 million. My total cost of ownership for a cloud-based solution would be about $1 million. And that means my total savings over 5 years would be about $583,000 with this model based on these situations that we're trying to resolve. Now, some people would say that's a lot, that's a little. It really depends on you and your situations that are there. But the cloud does offer some unique benefits and cost reductions. And if we look at this over the span of time, and one of the things I talked about is to say that, because at 5 years we might actually say, well, we're going to throw everything out that we have and on-prem and buy new, so it starts all over again, doesn't it, Scott? And no, it doesn't. It becomes another cumulative cost to say, well, I spent $115,000. I'm going to throw that away now because I want to buy another $115,000 worth of brand new equipment. So that means my new cost is $115,000. No, it's not. It's $230,000 because you already accumulated $115,000. So this model doesn't change because you're actually throwing out your old hardware and your old software and starting anew on an on-premise. It's the same. So over time, the cloud can offer some significant cost benefits. Okay, so here's some math. ROI is measured as a percentage, and typically you would take the net benefit and put that over the total investment cost and then create that as a percentage. So if we saw in the previous model that we had $583,000 of savings, as we looked in the total cost of ownership, our total investment in the cloud over that 5 years was a little over $1 million. And that would work out to about a 53.92% ROI. Scott said, why do you need two decimal places? You do. It looks better. So your ROI. So when somebody says, how do I determine my ROI on what the dollars I'm asking to be spent? That's how you would do it. And then you can look at your ROI, and it's quite interesting how that scales over time. I mean, it's clearly a huge ROI on year one. I mean, it's because we got all that capital cost going in to actually start on day one. But when we actually then apply the cloud, well, we still only have that one operating cost, which is our annual fee, subscription fee. So you can see the ROI will flatten out. It'll come down a little bit more. So over 5, 7, 10 years, I mean, this will come down. The typical model, if you go out there and you Google what is the ROI on a on-premise versus a cloud solution, whether it's broadcasting or whatever it might be, and the model moves anywhere from about a 20% to a 200% ROI. So these are real numbers. People are getting real value and real return on their investment in the cloud. So it's a real thing that has real value. And sometimes talking to your CEO, your CFO, they're going to want to know, what's my total cost of ownership for this thing? What is my ROI? And I think these are some of the tools that you can have to speak their language, to say, all right, not only I'm not just spending $1 million, there is a benefit here. And here's my return on investment. Here's my total cost of ownership over that period of time. That's the language that they're going to speak. Start commercial. I try not to do too many commercials here, but I did want to talk about where we are with ZettaCloud. I mean, we're in version 3 of the cloud, and now we're fully deployed in over 300 stations in the USA right now. And the operator does over $1 billion in annual revenue. So I'm not going to tell you who, but you can take a wild guess. And it also supports live from anywhere as well as automated. So I mean, basically, we're mixing live mic in the cloud, and we're combining those two, and we're sending it down to combining your audio and your live audio and your recorded audio, and then we're sending that down fully mixed to your receivers. And there's also hybrid solutions. And one of our operators has basically said, you know what, in certain markets, I want the comfort level of having the equipment in my embrace. So that way, when it becomes my responsibility to add something new, something difficult to the way that we're doing our operations, we're doing satellite, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're combining so many things. The on-premise offers us something more flexible in that regard. And I agree, it is. And in some situations, it's going to be a hybrid solution that's going to make better sense for you. Our smart edge player. Now, when I first went into this, one of the challenges, I've been talking about doing radio in the cloud for about 20 years. And there's just so many barriers that were there. And one of the biggest barriers was having something at the edge, at the final last mile, as they call it, right? And when it's talked to the transmitter. I need to have the confidence level that if, again, technical term, shit should happen, that in fact I had a solution that was robust and reliable. And something like our edge player is one of those robust and reliable solutions that in fact, if we should lose the stream that's coming down, we lost the internet, backhoe interruptions, all kinds of challenges, say interrupt the internet, it actually then would fail over because it's actually downloading at the same time the current schedules, the current audio assets for a period of time, whether it's 24, 48, 36 hours, whatever that might be. It's downloading all of those assets. Plus, there's what we call an emergency playlist. So even though I may have the current schedule and all these assets, if in fact I'm doing a live talk show on sports, I mean, clearly that schedule is not going to help me at all. So we do have multiple emergency playlists which can be triggered as well. So you can say, well, great, we're just doing the sports show, but let's fail over to this sports playlist as our backup in that scenario. I'm also talking about the multiple availability zones for that fault tolerance. So again, people have always said, oh, yeah, I've heard about Amazon went down and affected all of these people, and saying, yeah, we understand that. So if we're in multiple availability zones, it does cost a little bit extra, but in fact, it gives you the protection from those kinds of, we call them national disasters, things that we are not in control of. But we do offer an SLA. That's a service level agreement that will give you some guarantees and some protections financially, should any of our solutions fail. And again, that's when you're failed to go to air. That's why we have the Smart Edge player. That's why we have the multiple availability zones, because we believe the SLA is pretty high. So, end of commercial. Thank you very much. Any questions? I thank you for your patience. Thank you.
You promote him for vice president, he runs away.
That's all right. The other guy's here too.
Well, Scott, you're gonna give me a microphone, are you?
Oh, you can have this one.
Oh.
It's live until I mute it.
That sounds good. That keeps everyone frustrated. Scott, thank you very much.
Oh,
Very interesting presentation, all those numbers, and not one was Ohm's law. Thank you very much, sir. We'll do the scout shake.
Thank you, man.